And just like that, January is over. That's right, we are only 1 month into the year, and yet somehow it feels like a million years. But the good thing about that is I did give myself permission this month to just fully cocoon myself, which meant I got a lot of reading done. 11 books to be exact. My average is usually 6 to 8. So let's get into it. Oh, where are my manners? Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly, and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. Now, is it just me, or did people like super care about their first book of the year? This has never been something that I've like even thought about a little. Like, people really think about what book they're going to read to make sure that their first one is like the best one. Not the best one, but like just a good book, and like therefore setting off a good reading year. Last year I read Day by Michael Cunningham, and it was one of my least favorite books of the year. And the funny thing is, I forgot about it almost immediately after reading it, until I was looking at my lowest rated books to make that video. Oh, sorry, forgot about it again. Poor Michael Cunningham, just like catching strays in this video. Anyway, so with all that being said, I put absolutely no thought into what my first book of the year was gonna be, once again, and I ended up reading The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. And by reading, I mean finishing, because it was one of the books I'd been in the middle of for a really long time, and I finally just got around to actually finishing it. So I'm a little late to the game on this one, but honestly, it's because I kind of feel bad, like this is so silly. But growing up, I was definitely like of the age range of like girls that were growing up really liking Britney Spears. Like, this CD was my first CD that I can remember owning. But I remember when the lore around her kind of started changing, or the perspective, the public perspective started changing. And I remember hearing like just adults all the time talking about how much of a bad influence she was on young girls. And I started to like believe it. I started to think like, oh, she owes me something, purely because I'm a young girl growing up and I was looking up to her. Like, and I still feel bad about that. Like, I still feel bad about being like judgmental as a child of like somebody who is like so far removed from who I am. And also just like not being empathetic to what she was going through at the time. And that like, as the public, we didn't have all the information, right? And we were specifically being fed a very specific narrative about her. All that's to say, turns out this is actually a surprise apology video. So, Britney Spears, I'm sorry. Okay, but for real, like, I actually still feel bad. Like, I know I was a kid, but I actually still feel bad about that. And so I kind of put off reading this book when it first came out. Now I have, and I feel like it's so nice to get like more perspective. I know that like Britney Spears didn't write it, like she had a ghostwriter and all that, like I know all that, but it's still like the points of her life. And hearing some of the things that her dad did, her whole family, but mostly her dad, and like Justin Timberlake, excuse you? How dare you? But there was just like a lot of heartbreaking stuff in this to see like what she had to go through. And my only hope is that one, she's now in a better like place where she can have more freedoms that she didn't have for like quite some time. And two, that hopefully other people won't go through something similar because we have this like case that is very apparent. I feel a bit weird rating a memoir, which I think is how a lot of people feel. Basically, I didn't put a rating in my story graph, but I'm telling you now that if I had to rate it, I probably would put it at a 3. Like middle of the road, great information to get, not super great writing, not bad writing, just middle of the road. And reading this one meant for my book bingo board goals thing. It's the bingo board from hell, that's what it's called. So if you don't know, this is where like I'm keeping all of my goals is on this, and it was originally created by Winn from Literary Diversions. They'll definitely be linked in the description if you want to check out her channel, but this means that I can add 1 book to my nonfiction square. So yay. Next up is another book that I don't have physically, and that is The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han. So honestly, just like starting out the year with nonfictions for some reason. So I guess real quick, we can put that on the board as well. So I actually heard about this book through a YouTube video to be exact. And just like the way that he was talking about it in the video, it just made it sound pretty interesting. It was on Hoopla, so I was able to just like pick it up right away and read it. It was a pretty short nonfiction. However, it is definitely like philosophy, psychology, and all this centered. It does read a little bit like, you remember like scientific articles from school when you had to like look for sources to like add this like research to whatever paper you're writing, and like reading through those was like, it took like a lot of mental capacity. That's kind of what reading this book was like. If you're interested in it, I kind of feel like if you just watch this video, just hear like the parts that he talks about from this book, I think that you'll get like the main messages. But basically it's about burnout in the modern age, but also about how it's not really like sadness and like negative things that happen that are creating like this uptick in depression in our society, but instead it's like the expectation of positivity. Like everybody is always like projecting this super positive outward appearance at all times, especially with social media. And that can result in like everybody, including those people that are doing those posts, feeling like more negatively towards themselves, towards their own life, if they're not matching up with this like very curated vision of other people that they're seeing all the time. Not only that, but even in like corporate settings, you're kind of supposed to approach these bad things that happen in work by being like, okay, I need to just be doing like change management and like keeping a positive outlook, and like how can this be a good thing actually, and like all this kind of stuff. And there's just a lot of expectation to be like crazy productive, crazy positive, just all the time, 24/7, and that's just not realistic. So it leads to burnout, obviously. So that's one of like the major themes of this book. There is a lot of other stuff. Each chapter kind of approaches a different topic. I ended up giving this a 3.25 stars. I still think like I'm really glad that I read it because it did kind of feel like I was stretching my brain. Like my brain was doing like little workouts. Next up, I read The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. I feel way too proud telling you about this. Like it feels like I won an award or something and I should be like doing my acceptance speech. So 2 of his novels are in my like favorites of all time list, and then this is the 3rd one, and I hadn't read it until this month. You can actually kind of see I've got A Gentleman in Moscow here, and then Rules of Civility here. They live on my shelves, they stay on my shelves. I love them so much. So knowing that those 2 are favorites, it's crazy that it took me this long to read this one, but I ended up putting it on my TBR spin stack, and our first spin for January was to pick the book that you're most interested in reading or you most want to read, and with the help of the live stream chat, I ended up picking The Lincoln Highway. So thank you so much. I couldn't have done this without you. See, I told you this was an acceptance speech. Also, if you want to join in on TBR Spin, it is a year-long reading challenge where you pick 12 books at the beginning of the year, and each month we read one of those books, which is determined by a spin of a wheel that I do during a live stream, and then we also do reading sprints during that. It's still early enough in the year that you could probably catch up, but you could also start with our next live show, which is going to be February 23rd, I think? Yes, February 23rd. So you can join in on that, see what spin we get, and all you have to do is show up with 10 books to be a part of your stack for the rest of the year. Or you could always just come and hang out for the reading sprints. You don't have to actually take part in the TBR spin to join in on the reading sprints. Anyway, this follows brothers Emmett and Billy. At the start of the book, Emmett he's like coming back from this juvenile work farm thing that he's at because he got sentenced with involuntary manslaughter. So he's finished his sentence there, and actually he gets let go like a couple months early because his father passes away and their mother has like long since left. So he gets to go home because he has to like sort out things with the house, which is no longer going to be theirs anymore. Their dad wasn't great with money. And then of course there's Billy, his younger brother, to take care of. So Emmett and Billy decide that they are going to move out of Kansas, out of this small town in Kansas, just because like everybody knows their business. They know like about their parents. They know about Emmett and his involuntary manslaughter. There's a lot of kind of perceptions about them through the town that are not necessarily great. And so it would be kind of hard to like really progress in life, and also it would be hard for them to just be reminded of it all the time. And I know like technically Emmett did a bad thing, but I feel like once you hear the whole story, you're more on Emmett's side, even though like yes, it was a bad thing he did. So I'll just say that. So this book is meant to be them like setting out, starting their new lives, but then Emmett's friends, they end up finding him, and like things happen there, and it kind of just seems like this trip ends up getting more and more difficult to accomplish, or like things keep popping up that's kind of getting in the way of the ultimate goal. Overall, this book was great. I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. The writing was great, the setting was great, and just like the overall messages and themes just all around good book. This also marks off 2 squares from my book bingo board, that being a big book. This one was 576 pages. Also counts as a book from a favorite author. The next book that I read was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. After the other reading I was doing, I was really craving a thriller, and this was the only thriller that I had on my winter TBR, so I figured it was perfect to pick up. And honestly, it was exactly what I needed. This book follows 2 perspectives. The first one is Alex, who is a podcaster with like this seemingly perfect life. She's got like tons of friends. And then we also have Josie, our other perspective, who is a little bit quirky. She seems a little bit off. She has a family of her own, but she just like lives a much quieter life. So these 2 randomly meet at a restaurant when they're both celebrating their 45th birthday. So they were both actually born on the same day, which kind of gets them to talking about that. And then later Josie goes and like listens to Alex's podcast, and her podcast episodes like typically are just like interviews or talking to a woman who made like a huge life change later into life. And so Josie, the next time she happens to see Alex, is like, hey, you should totally make a podcast about me because I'm going to go through a big life change. And like my life is kind of like strange and different. So Alex is kind of intrigued by this because she's been feeling like she wants to try something a little bit different. So they end up doing this podcast, and while Alex is interviewing Josie and even just like in conversation with her in general, she just seems a little bit weird and like things aren't totally adding up. So that's kind of where like the thriller aspect kicks in. I flew through this book. It was super entertaining, but I will say that it wasn't super thrilling in the way that I usually crave thrillers to be. I was kind of okay with that though. There was something about this that just, because it was so readable, it was okay that it didn't have a ton of thrills that were like keeping me going through it, because the writing was doing that on its own. There also weren't a ton of big twists. I saw like the main part of it coming from pretty early on in the book, but there was something that did happen at the very end where I was surprised about that. Still not totally sure what to think about it. But yeah, overall, like it wasn't a favorite thriller ever, but it was very good, exactly what I needed, like I said. So I gave it a 3.5 stars. This doesn't go towards any goals on my book bingo list, but it was for my winter TBR, so that's good. Next, I read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Technically, I read just half of it in January, and I read the other half in like December. I just needed to take a break in the middle of this one because it was a lot. This feels like one of those booktube staples, so I'm really happy to have finally read it. This follows 4 college friends, Jude, Willem, JB, and Malcolm, and they're all living in New York. And over the like years of their lives, we see their friendships evolve, we see their individual lives evolve, their like wants, hopes, dreams, all of it. But the real heart of this novel is definitely Jude. He is like such a complex character. He comes from a lot of trauma, and he's just one of the most unique characters I think I've ever read. And this book spans like decades of their lives. So you get to see a lot. You get to see a lot of them. But I think what this book does like incredibly well is the actual friendship group. Like, I think that I've said about a few books that you feel a part of the friendship group, and I do think I was being honest about those, but like this takes that to a whole other level, because it's not just like, typically when I say that, it's kind of in the way of like, you just really love that friend group and you love the like conversations and the banter they have and everything. But this one, I feel like you feel about Jude the same way his friends feel about him. Like you have the exact same feelings towards him, and it's done in such a cool way. So Jude, within this friend group, he doesn't really share anything about himself. He doesn't talk about his past hardly at all, and even things about like his current day, the things that he likes, the things that he wants to do, if he's attracted to anybody, if he even wants anything romantic ever with anybody at all. Like, you don't know any of that stuff about him for a large portion of this book, and neither do his friends. So you have these conversations that they have where the other friends talk quite a bit about their lives, but Jude doesn't really. And while he definitely still is a friend to these people, he also feels very distant, but only if you really think about it. Like, imagine you're talking with a person and you're having a great time and you talk about like your job and your life and the things that you're like excited to do, all this stuff. And it's like the conversation's flowing the whole time. And it's only when you get to the end and really think about it that you realize that you didn't learn nearly as much about them as they learned about you. And it's not for a lack of asking questions or being interested. It's really just that the other person is like so good at deflecting and so good at turning the conversation back to the other person that you don't even really notice it until you start getting further and further into the book and the friends start mentioning that they don't really know anything about Jude, and you're like, oh yeah, like I don't really know anything about Jude. I think that that's what this book does so well. And then once you do start learning things about Jude and about his past, it's like you were like drip fed things at the beginning, or like once you actually start learning stuff about him, and then all of a sudden it's like full on fire hose, like open the floodgates. You learn so much about Jude. And it keeps feeling like there can't possibly be more, like I know it at this point, and then there's more and more and more and more. I know with 100% certainty I am never going to forget this book. And this one gets a 4.5 stars from me. Also, it's another big book for my big book square on the book bingo board. So like I said, I was in a bit of a thriller mood, and none of this is true, did really help with that, but I was still feeling it at this point. And so I ended up deciding to check out a book from the library, probably my most anticipated thriller that I hadn't read at this point, because I love Riley Sager. I've read all of his books. This was the only one that I hadn't read. So I really wanted to pick it up, and I just kind of felt like I deserved it at this point, especially after what it felt like to get through A Little Life, especially the ending there. Oh my gosh. So this one follows Ethan, who grew up in a like northeastern suburb on a cul-de-sac. And when he was a child, there was one night where he was camping with his best friend, Billy. And in the middle of the night, Billy gets taken. Like Ethan wakes up, there's a slash in the tent that they were camping in his own backyard, and Billy's gone. He's never seen again. And then the book is told many, many years later. I think Ethan's in his 30s at the point of the book, and he's coming back to the cul-de-sac because his parents are planning on selling the house. They've already moved out, and he's kind of like helping out with things. So he's now living in the house alone, and he's back like where this traumatic event happened. And then some things start to happen in the neighborhood that almost make it seem like Billy is still there. Like things only Billy would have known about and stuff. Overall, I think this was slightly more thrilling than None of This Is True, but I also don't think it was as good as that book. I didn't like this one all that much. It's probably one of my least favorite Riley Sagers. Not worse than Survive the Night, which is my actual least favorite, but it's probably somewhere around the bottom. So that was a little disappointing. I feel like the atmosphere wasn't as good as most Riley Sager books are. That's usually one of the things I absolutely love about his books. And it just didn't feel like it was there. Also, one of the things, like one of the reveals was so obvious from way early on in the book. I'm talking like pages into the book, to the point where I was really annoyed that Ethan didn't think about it even once. I was like, come on, it's right there. It's so obvious to me. Maybe it's because I knew Ethan was in a thriller book, but he doesn't know that, obviously. I will say though, I loved the ending of this book. I do think that that was like really fantastic. So this ended up being 3 stars for me, and also I get to add a book to the favorite authors square of my board. Next up, I read The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. This one also came for my winter TBR, so good there. And it was really on there because I have a book club for it, so of course I was gonna read it. This is a romance that follows Kit and Theo, and the setup is that they're like about to go on this nice European food and wine tour, and they are like flying to Paris to begin the tour, and they end up breaking up. And so they go their separate ways at the airport in Paris, and they both get a voucher from the tour company so that they can reschedule the tour as long as it's within 5 years. You probably know where this is going. So it's nearly 5 years later, and the vouchers are about to expire, and both Kit and Theo wind up, without knowing that the other one is, booking the same tour, like the last chance tour they have, using their vouchers. And so they end up being together for like, I think it's like a 20-day tour or something like that, which I thought was gonna be incredibly awkward, at least at the beginning, but actually it wasn't. Like, they so quickly kind of fit back into this like friendship that they had. They were friends for a long time before they got together, so I'm assuming that's kind of like where that comes from. But I will say that because of that, I didn't think that the book needed to be as long as it was. They could have gotten together so much earlier. Like, I just don't understand. Let's say you've got the one that got away. They're like somebody that you are still just like absolutely in love with. And you wind up in a situation where you're with them basically 24/7 for 20 days. I can understand why you maybe wouldn't want to say like, hey, I miss you. I think that like maybe we could rekindle things. Like, there is that possibility. I'd be willing if you're down. I could understand why maybe you don't want to start with that. But when the other person starts to show that they are also interested in you, or at the very minimum, very attracted to you still, if you were like picking up those vibes, which each of them definitely were, all the signs were there. And yet still neither of them wanted to talk about it. Isn't it worth your pride being possibly a little bit bruised? Because at the end of this, Kit lives in Paris now and Theo lives in the US. So they are very far apart. They don't have to see each other after this. I feel like it's okay to just kind of put it out there a little bit. Now, the good things about this book, I do think that you could definitely feel the love that they had for each other in a really nice way. And I liked their conversations back and forth. I thought like the banter was pretty cute. They are ridiculously horny for each other. So I wish that that was like toned down just a little bit, but the settings were really nice. It made me so badly want to be on a European tour. And also I was just hungry all the time while I was reading this book because the food is described oh my gosh, I want all the food that's mentioned. Oh, and this was a 3.5 stars for me, and it does accomplish the books for book club thing that I have. Square, goal, you get it. Up next, we have Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McLeod Chapman. This was actually one of my anticipated reads for 2025, so it felt really cool to like read it so quickly. So we're following Noah for the most part, and he lives in Brooklyn with his wife and kid, and he's been getting a lot of calls from his mom recently telling him that like he needs to prepare for this great reawakening and like all this stuff. And also she's already kind of, both his parents have kind of been going down this path of becoming more like close-minded, more right-leaning, like to the point of radicalization. For example, at Thanksgiving, talking about how people should go back to where they came from, talking about Black folks, by the way, Noah is literally married to a woman that's from Haiti. And so their daughter is also obviously mixed. I think they did bring up something about it at the time, and she was like, oh no, not you. I was like, okay, I get it. I get who you are. But then he just like stops getting calls from his mom, and then she's not answering the phone like at all. So he starts getting a little bit worried, and he ends up driving from Brooklyn to Richmond, Virginia, which is where they live. And he finds his parents basically like catatonic in front of the TV, and then they attack him. So this is definitely like a horror book, which I kind of struggle sometimes with reading horror, specifically if there's like gore related to it. I'm really glad that I pushed through. There was a moment where I was like, maybe I can't, but I'm really glad that I ended up finishing it and reading the whole thing because I thought it was really good. I know I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time afterwards. Seeing the way that the different characters within the book kind of going down their own pipelines that are all leading to the same point of radicalization, it's just done in such an interesting way. And like seeing why those people kind of wind up that way, or why they're specifically looking for these sources of reason in their lives without realizing that that's what they're doing. It's weird because it like humanizes them, and then once it's gone too far, it entirely dehumanizes them. So it's very interesting. But yeah, it was so good. I gave it 4 stars. It has no effect on my goals for this year. Next, I got another book from the library. That was A Court of Frost and Starlight from Sarah J. Maas, or by Sarah J. Maas, which is the 4th book in the ACOTAR series. I don't have a ton to say about this, really. Everybody told me that I didn't need to read the novella that is in that series, that I could just skip it and go to the next one, because people knew how much I was struggling with Feyre's perspective in general, and I felt like I really needed a switch up in the series in order to continue even enjoying it a little bit. But I am nothing if not a completionist when it comes to series, even when they have these like novellas that are brought in. So I had to, and it was like winter and it was snowing and it came in from the library, and it all just, everything seemed to just fit perfectly to where I had to read this. But you were all right, I didn't have to. But the good thing is we don't just get Feyre's perspective in this, we get a few perspectives. So that was kind of nice. Without spoiling anything, basically this takes place during the winter solstice, which is like their winter holiday. And we have like our main group, our main friend group that is getting together, getting each other gifts, all that kind of stuff. And they're also dealing with some things that have happened as a result of what happened at the end of the third book. My history with the series is very mixed. I didn't like the first book. I really liked the second book. I really didn't like the third book. And then there's this book. Where does this fall in that? I don't know. Ambivalence? It was fine. It was fine. I didn't need to read it. It was okay. Also, once again, we have characters that are too horny for each other. I feel like sometimes in books we really lose sight of why characters like each other, especially further into like romantasy series. And it becomes just this like, you see the other person and you're like, how long has it been since I've been under them? And you're like, okay, you need to take it down a notch. Also, something that really annoyed me, which happened early in the book, I feel like Sarah J. Maas was trying so hard to get me to like Feyre. And because you could feel it, because you could feel how hard she was trying, it made me dislike her even more. Basically, like Feyre's walking through the town and thinking like, oh, I need to be doing more, like I need to be helping out the community more, and she's thinking about how much she has been helping the community. She's like, I gotta do more, like I'm not doing enough. And then like people that are a part of the community that are actually impacted by this thing that happened are like, oh no, you've done so much for us, you're so amazing, but like you should go enjoy winter solstice. Like go enjoy it. Don't worry about us. Like take the day off, take the weekend off. Like you've already done so much for us. We couldn't possibly ask any more of you. Like the book was just like telling us what a good person she was and not showing us, and that it was using these people that are a part of the town as just like little props to let us know that Feyre is actually a really good person. So yeah, overall, I ended up giving this book a 2.5 star, but the good news is that I do get to put, this is my first book that I get to put on my like series tracker square. That's a win. Next, we have another book for my winter TBR, which is How To by Randall Munroe. This book basically comes up with really ridiculous ways for like how to do specific things. It says it well, absurd scientific advice for common real world problems. So the hypotheticals that are in this book may be insane, but the actual way to like go about solving it are also kind of insane, but they're all based in science. So you're learning things about science while it's telling you. I don't have a ton to say about it. It was just kind of fun to read through. I kind of did like one how-to question a day and started my days with that, which was nice because it got me like kind of thinking outside the box a little bit. And I do think that it like promotes curiosity in general. But I did get to add another book to my nonfiction square, as well as this was one of the books that I've owned since before 2021. In fact, this was the oldest book on my TBR, so very exciting that I read it. And actually, speaking of that square, I've never said like how many books that square means, but I did actually figure it out myself. There are 13 books that I have owned since before 2021. These are all of them, and I can officially cross this one off the list, which means I'm about 8% of the way completed with this goal. And then the last book that I read in January was Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This was the third book in the Empyrean series, and it was, once again, a lot of fun. That's what I typically say about this series in general. It's a lot of fun. I credit it with helping me get back into fantasy, which I was struggling with for quite a while, but now I'm reading like actual high fantasy, not just romantasy. So thank you so much to Fourth Wing for that. This series follows Violet, who's meant to go into this like scribe quadrant. And then last minute, she's like, actually, no, I'm gonna go into this battle thing, school. And they fight with dragons and they get like powers, and it's really cool. There's a lot of like kick-ass battle scenes or like challenges that like need to be done in order to stay in the school and like continue progressing forward. That's all in the first book. So we get like a lot of like school stuff in the first book. I still think that that one's my favorite, but this one's probably my second favorite. I do think I liked it more than Iron Flame. I also love that our main character in the series is really like a book girl at heart because it means that about like 4 times each book you get to go into this like amazing dark academia library that I really love. Like just the setting of it, the atmosphere of it, it makes me very happy. And like I said, this is a romantasy series, so there is a relationship that is at the center of it. And honestly, at this point, I do kind of wish it was just a fantasy series. I think my problem is that I care about a couple like right up until they're together, and then they are more than welcome to stay together and be cute and everything. but like, I don't want to hear about it anymore. Or I don't want to hear about it more than like maybe 3-4 times a book. But when you're in a romantasy series, like, you're obviously going to hear about it a lot more than that. And I just didn't care anymore, like, all that much. It felt like we're going kind of over the same types of conversations again and again. There is a big different thing that's happening in this book that I can't tell you about. So I guess that added a little something to it, but like, overall I was kind of like, ugh. It's sad when it gets to the point where I'm kind of excited when they're spending time apart, because like, I just don't want to hear about it. It's cute that you're together. I don't want you to split up or anything, but like, I want to hear about other stuff going on. Also, sometimes it does kind of border on like an unhealthy dependence on each other, which to a certain extent I understand for like some reasons that once again I can't talk about, but it's a little uncomfortable. Also, like, Xaden in general in this one, because of what's going on with him, he starts leaning into this specific trope of a type of boyfriend that is very common, especially in, I think, romantasy series. Basically this like overprotectiveness. And I hate it. I like actually hate it. And I know that there's a reason behind it, but I also cannot stand it. So I think that that makes it a little bit more challenging. However, I do think that for a lot of people that could be almost like a benefit of like giving a purpose and reason behind this so that it's like not as weird. And so therefore you can kind of think it's like cute and everything. I could see that. I could see some people actually liking it for that, but just for me personally, ugh. One of my favorite things about the series is the friend group. The friend group in this, they all feel like their own people that are going through their own things. You know, like the friends that are the closest out of the friend group, like maybe there's a pair of people that are hanging out like more often with each other than like with everybody else in the group. So you know, like the smaller groups within the larger group, and you understand their banter, and they do feel like they have different types of humor, but that they all mesh really well together. I just feel like it works more. It feels more realistic. And so it feels more comforting to be in that group, which is how I think all friend groups should feel. Like a friend group should feel comforting in a book. That should feel like the safe space. And I think that this book does that really well. Or the whole series does it really well. I also think that one of the main reasons why I liked this better than Iron Flame was because I felt like we had a little bit more direction in this one than we did in Iron Flame. Like, I knew what the main goal was. I knew why these smaller goals like kind of helped us towards that. I very rarely had any point where I was thinking like, okay, like what are we doing next? I usually knew, you know, where we were going. Oh, also this was a 4.25 stars, and also it counts towards my big book square and my series tracker square. Oh, also it counts as a 2025 purchase. So let's actually talk a little bit about that square. So one of the squares is to read 60% of my 2025 book purchases, which is basically just to help me be purchasing more intentionally. This is a square that Winn has on their book bingo board as well. And actually, like a lot of these squares are, I only changed a couple of them just to work better for me. And so this month I bought 4 books. So we have Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix, Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb, which is the first book of the next trilogy I'll be reading, which is the Tawny Man trilogy, I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, and of course, Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. So I've read one of those 4, so I'm at 25%, which I feel like is pretty good. Also, I do think it worked to help me buy more intentionally because all 3 of these books I'm planning on reading in January. Or not January. That just happened in February, this month. Basically, like these 2 are for book clubs. This one is for the Fits Along, also done by Winn from Literary Diversions. So that means I'm at 25% of my purchases. I feel like that's pretty good. I didn't actually end up buying these books until like the last week of January, so I didn't really have a lot of time to actually read them. But now we kind of have something to work with. We have like a list of purchases from 2025 that we have to work with. So here is officially my book bingo board for this month. Like at the end of this month, I kind of feel like I made a lot of great progress in it. I feel like I got a lot of different squares and everything, a lot of diversity in the goals that I was achieving. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased, honestly. And overall, at the beginning of the year, I had 150 books on my TBR, like going into 2025, which I think is like the same number that I had at the beginning of 2024, which I don't even know how I feel about that. I mean, I guess it's good that it's not going up. And then at the end of January, I am at 156 books. So oops. When I was recording my anticipated releases for the year, I then went on NetGalley and like requested a bunch of them and then like a couple of other ones. So that's why. So I think going forward, like February, I see us going down. I see that number going down. So hopefully we'll see. I don't really have a goal associated with lowering my overall TBR, but it is kind of always like a mental goal in my head. So those are the 11 books that I read in January. Please let me know what your favorite and maybe least favorite books of January were. I'd love to hear about it. And subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.